The question to eliminate the Supreme Court usually comes up when we don't agree with a decision they've made or side they've chosen. It can be frustrating to us whenever they do this, as we would hope they would take all the various factors into play and come to the best decisions based on the evidence. However, the Supreme Court works differently than most institutions and power structures, or at least they should. They go by the letter of the law and what the Constitution states, regardless of external factors, personal feelings, or even the accepted culture of the times. To understand how this works, let's take an example. Imagine that you're in college and another student is wearing a shirt that deeply offends you. You can think of the shirt as being something that goes totally against your beliefs or sense of justice, and you feel like they should not be wearing it on campus. After dishing out your anger on the student and to their persistent objection, you take it to your professor, who agrees with you and commands the student to change the shirt. However, the student who has offended you, knowing the rules, goes to the Office of Student Affairs to plead their case. They also call you in to plead yours. Perhaps in the school's code of conduct, it says that students should not be wearing any clothing with lewd or profane imagery or writing. The offended student argues that the shirt is not lewd or profane, and yet you plead that it is profane because the certain type of wording is violence toward a marginalized group, or maybe deep hatred towards your beliefs or something like that. In the end, the Office of Student Affairs sides with the offending student, saying that the shirt, although subjectively offensive, does not fall into the definition of lewd or profane, and therefore, by the letter of the Code of Conduct, is acceptable. Enraged, you get a bunch of your friends together and protest against the school, saying that the Office of Student Affairs is useless and should be eliminated. Imagine if your cries are heard, and you actually cause that to happen. No more Office of Student Affairs. Instead, you can now go straight to the professors themselves to enforce the rules and no longer have this additional oversight. So far, so good, right? Your professor agrees with your viewpoint, and you get what you want. For a time. Well, the next year comes and you get another professor who has an opposing viewpoint. This time, you're wearing a shirt that offends someone else. This student yells at you and you laugh in their face, knowing that your shirt is perfectly acceptable. It's not lewd or profane, despite having some strong statement of view you agree with that the offended student does not. So they go to this new professor to argue their case, and the professor tells you that you need to change your shirt because they're offended by it as well. Surprised by this, you get angry and yell at the professor, saying how wrong they are and how you will fight this decision. However, the professor tells you that there is no higher authority to take this to, that the professors in this school are indeed the highest authorities, meaning what they say goes. You have no choice. Either change the shirt or be expelled. You see, that additional check on power was eliminated. At the time, it sounded good to get rid of it because the professors at the time held your worldview and sided with your beliefs. But the problem is, you cannot always guarantee that there are always going to be professors that share your worldview. And as soon as new professors come in with a different worldview, with different morals, ethics, and beliefs, you've eliminated the checks on their power by getting rid of the Office of Student Affairs. A similar thing would happen if the Supreme Court were eliminated. They are a check on power to ensure that any laws and decisions that are made are held against the letter of the law, namely the Constitution of the United States. And although there may be people in power at a given time that you like and agree with, you can never guarantee that will always be the case. Other people come into power, and they may have completely different values than you. So what do? Do you have to just deal with offenses and go along with things you don't agree with? This, admittedly, is an underlying problem of democracy, and more specifically, the structure of a constitutional republic that is America. It is structured in a way that upholds individual freedoms so that those in power are held against these laws that ensure our freedoms. Sometimes you may not agree with some of these laws, and you just have to make compromises. Although you may not like it, it's better than just about Any system where there are no checks and power, and one dictator or branch of government or single political party makes all the decisions, whether you like it or not. Does this mean you shouldn't fight for what you believe is right and just accept things the way they are? Of course not. America has changed its laws throughout its history and even amended the Constitution several times. In our example, perhaps you think the code of conduct should be expanded to include other forms of clothing that are offensive. You can perhaps fight to get it changed, get others involved, speak with students, teachers, and faculty to get everyone to see your point is valid and that the code should be amended. However, be careful what you wish for, because any new laws that come into play will now also apply to you, meaning you may inadvertently end up restricting your own freedoms of expression. I'm inclined to mention the relatively recent and controversial Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, which guaranteed abortion rights to women throughout the country. Putting aside whether this was right or wrong, the implications of the decision was one that was pretty fascinating and could really help us understand how the American system works. I remember the day it happened, there was much protest in the city of New York, where I live, and I was speaking to a woman who was saying her rights were taken away. I thought it was strange she felt this way because the right to abortion is codified in New York state law, even before Roe v. Wade was implemented. What the Supreme Court had decided was that it was not the right of the federal government to enforce the right to abortion based on the Constitution. In this case, specifically the 14th Amendment, and even more specifically, the due clause in that amendment, which states, "No state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws." Doesn't really say much about abortion, does it? Which was why the Supreme Court overturned the decision, basically saying that it was a stretch to interpret it as applying to abortion. Think about this for a second. The Supreme Court said, basically, it's not in the Constitution, therefore, the federal government has no right to make a decision on this case. It's the decision of the states. Yet a lot of people interpreted this decision as, abortion is now illegal. Which, yes, in some states, it would indeed now be illegal, but not in all states. Interesting to note is that usually government power tends to grow and get more centralized, whereas in this case, the Supreme Court took power away from the federal government and gave it back to the states, the more local governments. Using our example, it's almost like the Office of Student Affairs said, "We have no right to dictate what you wear to class. It's up to each professor to make that decision for their own individual class." Yet, that could mean now that you have a professor that doesn't allow certain types of clothing that you want to wear, and yet allows other clothing that may offend you. So what do? Well, you don't have to just sit back and take it. You can try and do something about it. First, you can plead with your professor and try to get them to change their mind. You could switch classes, although maybe that's not an option because you may really like this class, or it may be the only class for the subject you want. In real life, this would mean moving to a state that more aligns with your values. Or you can go to the top and try to get the rules established in the handbook so that it's not up to the professors. It's a law that all professors must follow, regardless of their viewpoint. This is analogous to amending the Constitution, which, although very difficult, is certainly possible. France just recently did it. They amended their constitution to guarantee the right to abortion throughout the whole country. It cannot be fought by any local courts anymore. It's in their constitution and it's guaranteed. So you do have options, some easier than others, but at least you do have options. The great thing about our system is that power is shared. And nobody can just make decisions on their own. We all do it together, at least in theory. Although our system isn't perfect, and although they don't always get it right, the Supreme Court is a uniquely American check on power that has helped us progress in our freedoms as a country and our equality as individuals. If it weren't for them, who knows what type of tyrannical government we'd be living in. I certainly wouldn't want our politicians to have full control over our lives, would you? So although you may not always agree with them, be thankful for the Supreme Court and be skeptical of anyone who says we should get rid of them. They probably want more power for themselves and to make decisions for all of us, which we may not agree with. Whether you're a Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, pro or anti-abortion, if the Supreme Court is doing their job right, you're going to be disappointed by some of their decisions, and yet very happy with a lot of others. They're there to protect your freedom.